I always believed that trust formed the bedrock of our marriage, and I clung to that assumption for 6 years of wedded life. My wife, Paige, was someone I'd known since college, when we bonded over late-night study sessions and half-priced wings at a bar near campus. We merged our lives in what I had hoped was a harmonious partnership. Then, about 4 months ago, everything changed. I started noticing small behavioral shifts. She'd glance at her phone more often, lock it with a new passcode, and leave the room to answer calls. There was this tension whenever she got home from work, a restless energy I couldn't quite place. The warmth I used to see in her eyes had dulled, replaced by a frantic kind of indifference. I remember telling myself she was probably stressed about her job or a family matter, but my gut wouldn't let it rest. Suspicion crept in, turning innocent moments into potential clues. I tried to talk to her one night, suggesting she might want to cut down on late evenings out with her coworkers, but she brushed me off with a tired wave of her hand. I grew certain something sinister was at play. I just never expected it to involve my friend, or that he wouldn't be the only one. And I certainly never planned for the chain of events that would lead me down a path of merciless retribution. Before that fateful night, I had no intention of controlling Paige's social life, but something about the way she insisted on going to the bar after her shift felt off. It wasn't just an ordinary girls' night or a chance to unwind. It felt like a compulsion, an obligation. I told her, maybe even pleaded, not to go. I can't say for sure whether it was genuine worry or the faint throbbing suspicion that had been plaguing me for weeks. She stared back at me with a look of defiance I'd never seen before, as though I had no right to question her. Her exact words were, "Don't try to tell me what to do, okay?" That sentence alone rang alarm bells in my head, but I let her walk out the door. A piece of me wondered if I had made a mistake by not insisting harder. Then, an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from a mutual acquaintance. "Dude, are you here? Paige just walked in with Evan." Evan was one of my closest friends, someone I had confided in about these very doubts. Confusion and anger warred within me as I tossed on my jacket and rushed out to see the spectacle for myself. When I reached that dimly lit bar, I spotted them nestled in a booth at the far corner. At first, it looked innocent. Maybe they were just chatting. But then I caught Paige's hand running slowly up Evan's arm, and his voice leaning in close, whispering something that made her giggle. My stomach churned. I snapped a quick photo on my phone, heart hammering, and left before either of them noticed. It felt like my entire world was tilting. On the drive back, I realized it would be naive to assume that was the first time. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I sat on our couch, waiting for her to come home, my mind racing through every possible explanation. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, but the evidence was too stark. When she finally walked in, around 2 in the morning, she looked surprised to see me awake. She mumbled something about being exhausted, then slid into the bedroom without another word. There was no remorse, no shame in her eyes. It tore me up inside. By morning, I had resolved to gather more concrete proof before making my move. I wanted no room for denials or blame shifting, so I played the part of the oblivious husband. I gave her space, didn't press her, pretended everything was normal. Meanwhile, I installed a small security camera in my living room and began combing through her social media. I checked phone records, card transactions, everything. Some might call this invasion of privacy, but the betrayal was hers, and I needed the truth. Slowly, the pieces came together. She was meeting not just Evan, but also a couple of random guys from her gym, flirting openly on social media under pseudonyms, staying late at a coworker's place. The scale of it floored me. Paige was living a double life, one she apparently felt zero regret about. I felt sick to my stomach. For a long time, I thought, where did I go wrong? What changed? But the more I dug, the more I realized her duplicity ran deep, and I was just the clueless fool she strung along. And that's when my anger shifted. It crystallized into a cold resolve that I would make her pay for every single lie. Evan was the real kicker. He had been my buddy since sophomore year of college. We'd gone on road trips, shared countless beers, watched each other's backs. He was the one person I'd trusted enough to talk about my marriage issues, my fear that Paige might be slipping away from me. And here he was, taking advantage of the situation. It wasn't even the idea that he was the only other man. It was the brazen way he'd come into my home, looked me in the eye, and pretended to care about my problems. I remember the last time he and I had lunch before everything blew up. He asked me how Paige was doing, all concerned. He even offered to talk to her if I thought it might help. Now I realize that was part of their twisted game. The betrayal stung. My immediate reaction was to drive to his place, break down his door, and punch him square in the face. But I held back. Giving in to raw violence wouldn't fix anything. I needed a precise, well-executed plan to expose them both, to reclaim my dignity, and to ensure they felt the consequences of their actions. So I spent the next few weeks gathering incontrovertible evidence. I documented every suspicious transaction. I saved screenshots of her flirty exchanges, timestamped them, cross-referenced them with phone logs, and built a timeline of her activities. I enlisted a tech-savvy buddy who helped me recover deleted messages from her phone backups. The truth was overwhelming. She wasn't just maybe cheating, she was juggling multiple affairs with impressive audacity. I felt like an idiot, but I also felt a surge of determination. I started sleeping in the guest bedroom, letting Paige assume I was in a sulky mood. She never once tried to fix things. She never asked if we were okay. It was as if she'd already written me off. My resentment grew stronger by the day. But rather than confront her with the evidence immediately, I decided to focus on how to maximize the fallout for her and for Evan. I reached out to a divorce attorney, a quiet but ruthlessly efficient woman named Carla, who specialized in high-asset cases. Although we weren't millionaires, we both had decent incomes and owned a modest property, so Carla's expertise was exactly what I needed. I explained my situation, laid out my proof, and listened to her recommended course of action. The plan was simple: gather more evidence to ensure a favorable settlement, and catch Paige off guard so she wouldn't have time to hide or manipulate assets. Meanwhile, I pretended life carried on as usual. I didn't cut off her credit card access or confront her about questionable withdrawals. I just watched, recorded, and waited. Evan was going to get his due as well. I recalled that he'd recently started a new job in a prestigious firm, a place that frowned upon personal scandals if they compromised the company's image. And from the messages I'd recovered, there were some that suggested he misused company property to facilitate his liaisons with Paige. If I played this right, he could very well lose that job and his professional standing. I was more than happy to see him suffer. One night, about 3 weeks into my investigation, Paige made a sloppy mistake that revealed just how little she cared about hiding her activities. She texted me, claiming she had to work late. I knew from her location data that she was actually at a hotel downtown. Normally, she was a bit more cryptic, but this time, she left her laptop at home, still logged into her email. I peeked and found a reservation confirmation for a suite under an alias. She was meeting a man named Ross, someone I'd never heard of, presumably a fling from her gym. At this point, my blood boiled, but I maintained composure. I called a trusted private investigator I had hired, asked him to snap some pictures, and made sure to get visual proof of Paige and Ross entering the hotel. The photos arrived on my phone that very night. Paige, wearing a dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, hooking her arm around Ross in the hotel lobby. It was a surreal moment. I clicked through the pictures again and again. This wasn't just a fleeting lapse in judgment. She was brazenly carrying on multiple affairs. That was all I needed to finalize my plan. I sent everything to Carla for safekeeping. Then I prepared a digital dossier for Evan's firm, carefully compiling screenshots of him booking company-owned vehicles to pick Paige up at questionable times, along with the explicit texts they exchanged. I was meticulous, labeling each piece of evidence with dates, times, and links to phone records. Soon, I'd have enough to detonate both their worlds. I remember the morning I decided to set everything in motion. Paige was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone without a hint of guilt. I asked her, as casually as I could, how work was going. She shrugged, said it was fine, and mentioned she'd be out again that evening for some team-building event. I just nodded. Inside, I was seething, but my face showed nothing. Before leaving for my own job, I whispered to her, "Be careful tonight." She gave me a suspicious look, but said nothing. Little did she know, I had already filed the divorce papers. Carla had them ready, waiting for Paige's next big slip. And it was going to be tonight. I had arranged for the private investigator to follow her, record everything, and provide a final batch of irrefutable proof that she was with yet another lover. At the same time, I was planning to email the compiled dossier on Evan to the HR department at his firm. I included a polite note that said, "I thought you should be aware of what your employee has been using company resources for." It was all very factual, no emotional language, just the damning details. Once I hit send, there would be no going back. Part of me wondered if I was stooping too low, if I was poisoning my own soul by investing so much energy into revenge. But the memory of their betrayal, the months of deception, and the sheer disrespect slammed those doubts down. This wasn't me being petty. This was me leveling the scales. That night, Paige left around 7, all dressed up in what she called office attire, but was clearly more suited for a date. I waited an hour just in case she tried to double back or pull any last-minute changes. Then I drove to the downtown restaurant where my investigator had tracked her. I parked across the street in the shadows and watched as she giggled at a corner table with a man I recognized from her phone's contact list as Tyler, work friend. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay focused. This was the final piece of evidence. I took photos with a camera that had a good zoom lens. I caught them holding hands, leaning in intimately. She looked at him the way she once looked at me. Any lingering sadness vanished, replaced by a fierce sense of justice. After snapping enough pictures, I retreated to my car, compiled them into an email, and sent them straight to Carla. 5 minutes later, I hit send on the dossier to Evan's HR department. I sat there, in the driver's seat, staring at my phone, feeling the gravity of what I'd just done. It was a mixture of relief and rage, satisfaction and disgust. But I couldn't let up now. I headed back home, gathered up the divorce papers, laid them neatly on the dining table, and taped a note on top. I know about everything. We're done. I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come back from her so-called team-building exercise. I pictured the carnage that would unfold for both Paige and Evan. He'd likely face a severe investigation or outright termination. She'd face a legal battle that would not end in her favor. And I felt no remorse. It was past midnight when she arrived. I could smell traces of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her clothes. She paused when she saw me in the living room, then eyed the stack of papers. Her face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" she asked, her voice trembling between shock and anger. I told her calmly that I knew about Evan, about Ross, about Tyler, and who knows who else. I saw her eyes dart to the divorce documents, scanning the bold words that laid out adultery as the cause. She started stammering, "It's not what you think," and tried to put on an indignant act, but she was cornered. All the evidence was right there. She flipped through the pages, seeing photos, text message transcripts, receipts. She demanded to know how I got them, as if that mattered. I stayed silent, letting her hysteria build. She launched into a tirade, accusing me of invading her privacy, claiming I was overreacting. I shook my head and told her to pack her things. "I warned you not to go out," I said, my voice like ice. "But you did anyway. Now you face the consequences." Her eyes flashed with rage. She tried to threaten me, saying she'd fight tooth and nail in the divorce, that she'd ruin me financially. She even threw in some cheap shots about how I was never good enough for her. I felt the sting, but it only fueled my determination. I told her I had a lawyer, and the evidence was ironclad. She could drag out the divorce all she wanted, but she'd only hurt herself more. Then I walked to the bedroom, locked the door, and left her to spend the night in our living room, stewing in the reality she'd created. The next day, I didn't bother talking to her. I left early for work. Carla confirmed that she had filed everything and that the advantage was on my side. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Meanwhile, Paige tried calling me several times, but I let it go to voicemail. She left frantic messages, half apologizing, half threatening. She wanted to meet in person, to work things out. I deleted the voicemails. There was nothing left to discuss. By evening, I came home to find her rummaging through drawers, presumably gathering her belongings. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and spat out, "You're cruel." I almost laughed. "Cruel?" I repeated. "I trusted you. You made me into a fool, and I'm cruel?" She tried to argue that I was blowing this out of proportion, that everyone makes mistakes. I reminded her that a mistake is something you regret, something you don't do over and over again with multiple people. She had turned betrayal into a pastime. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern of disrespect. I told her to leave, handed her a few boxes, and calmly waited in the other room until she was gone. With that, the final vestiges of our marriage crumbled. Evan tried calling me too, presumably to spin some pathetic defense or to beg me not to ruin his life. I didn't pick up. In the following weeks, I heard through the grapevine that he got reprimanded at work, possibly faced termination, and that his relationship with his fiancée, a sweet woman I'd met once or twice, was hanging by a thread. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but none for him. He reaped what he sowed. My days became a whirlwind of legal proceedings, dividing assets, and ensuring Paige couldn't claim more than she deserved. Carla guided me through every step, and with the mountain of evidence on my side, Paige's threats fell flat. She tried to paint me as controlling, but the sheer volume of proof about her affairs drowned out her complaints. I made sure to keep the high ground. No name-calling, no public shaming beyond what was necessary. The divorce itself was all the punishment Paige needed, along with the financial repercussions of losing any moral high ground. Occasionally, I'd hear from a mutual friend about how Paige was couch surfing or complaining about how I ruined her life. I refused to feel sorry for her. I devoted 6 years of my life to that marriage, worked hard, remained faithful, supported her dreams, and in return, I was lied to and humiliated. So no, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. To me, her downfall was a natural result of her choices, and the best part, I kept my cool and dismantled her life without stooping to her level of deceit. I'd like to say that after finalizing the divorce, everything was sunshine and rainbows for me, but that wouldn't be realistic. I struggled with the emotional aftermath, questioning my self-worth, my judgment, and how I let myself be blind to her antics for so long. I took some time off work, saw a therapist, and slowly unraveled the mess in my head. I realized I wasn't just angry at her, I was angry at myself for not seeing the red flags sooner. Healing took time, but as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into a couple of months, I found a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I reconnected with old friends, took up some new hobbies, and made sure I didn't isolate myself. And every time I felt a pang of regret or doubt, I reminded myself of the moment I saw Paige and Evan together in that bar, giggling like lovers while my world fell apart. That image alone was enough to reinforce that I had done the right thing. In the end, Paige moved out of state, presumably trying to start fresh somewhere else. Evan disappeared from our social circle, too ashamed or too humiliated to show his face. I never heard from him again, not that I cared. I'd gotten my closure. They betrayed me in ways I never thought possible, and they both paid the price. Paige with a disastrous reputation and limited financial prospects after the divorce, Evan with a tarnished professional record and a personal life in ruins. And as for me, I came out stronger, wiser, and with zero regrets for the revenge I served, because sometimes betrayal deserves nothing less.